I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Sabrina Nanji with us today. She's a fascinating individual, and she's just launched a online newsletter that's really quite interesting because it's focused on what's going on in Queen's Park. She is the journalist and founder at the Queen's Park Observer. And, we've got lots going on. We've got polls that are coming out. We got a convention in the Liberal Party this weekend. And we've got, ongoing issues in regards to Trump, tariffs, national unity, etc. And so I think this is an interesting time for Sabrina to, number one, launch this online newsletter, and then number two, to come on our show. Sabrina, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.
My pleasure. It's going to be fun. So tell me, why did you launch this Queen's Park Observer? Why do you think there's interest in what's going on at Queen's Park?
Yeah, I guess I love Queen's Park. I've been in the press gallery since 2016, so almost 10 years now. And I had worked for some of the other newsletters at Queen's Park. It's pretty saturated, and in the gallery, the press gallery there was four newsletters. Now there's three, and I'm one of them. And I think after working for some of the other newsletters, I thought, why don't I just try and do this on my own? And do it in my own voice, I guess, right? Like, you spend all these years developing sources, your own voice, and let's see how it goes. And that happened in 2021. So, 4 years later, still going strong. People seem to like it. It's just me. I guess the editorial, we kind of use that. I know, I cover everything from, big headlines of the day to inside baseball. You mentioned the Liberal AGM convention coming up this week, politicians and staffers' birthdays, and what's on the menu in the basement cafeteria, which a lot of people seem to love. So I'm proud to say I'm now the most read newsletter at Queen's Park. Pretty much every MP, their top staff, and then beyond, the bubble, it's unions, lobbyists, civil servants, anyone who needs to know what's going on at Queen's Park and maybe a little bit more. They read my newsletter. Actually, kind of proud that I've heard some people say you're a good balance of gossip and analysis. And so I don't know if some people call me the gossip girl of Queen's Park, but it's credible gossip, And so I think that that's what sets me apart from the rest of the press gallery.
A good combination of credible analysis and gossip. That sounds like an interesting tagline. And so just, before we get into the meat of everything, if people want to follow you or get access to your newsletter, how do they do that?
Yeah, you just got to go to qpobserver.ca. There's all the information there. You can sign up. There's even a free subscription. Like today's issue, for instance, was free, so everyone could read it. And if you like it, you can buy a subscription. If it's a little out of your price range, just reach out to me directly, and we can talk.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. So let's get into the meat of it. So I saw numerous polls that came out recently that show that Doug Ford's even doing better than he did at Election Day. Is that true, do you think? And why?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the premier himself is fond of saying that, polls are for dogs. And the only poll that really matters is the one on election day. And we did just have an election not that long ago in February, a snap election. And it seems like Ontario is still in a bit of a honeymoon phase with Doug Ford and the Conservatives. He's doing better than, by most pollsters. I think it was Abacus that had him at an all-time high, in the 50s, and that's virtually unheard of in Canadian politics, right? And so I think there's a lot of factors at play there. Obviously, it was rare for Doug Ford to win a third majority mandate. That's not something that usually happens in Ontario. So he's, got a pretty healthy a healthy government at Queen's Park. He can pretty much do whatever he wants. And I will say that he has been leaning into this Captain Canada role, that at a time when Prime Minister Mark Carney is sort of playing elbows down a little bit with Trump, Ford is going full tilt, and he's got his elbows up, and he's had some harsh words for Trump. And I would say arguably he's got less skin in the game, compared to Carney. He's not the one that's sitting across the negotiating table from Trump. He has been doing a lot of, a charm offensive with a lot of the governors south of the border. But I think that that's really working for him, obviously, that a lot of Canadians, he's speaking to them viscerally, who are ticked off about Trump and tariffs and everything that does not seem, this whole trade war does not seem to be ending anytime soon. And I think it also makes it really difficult for his critics, right? Like the opposition NDP and the Liberals and even the Greens, who have a pretty relatively strong presence at Queen's Park. It's hard to criticize Ford when he's got this Captain Canada cape on and he's standing up for Ontario and Ontario jobs. Now, the House isn't sitting. It's not going to be back until almost Halloween, October 20th, which means that there's not a lot of question period debate, not a lot of opportunity for opposition critics to, get their clips on social media of them holding Ford and his government to account. So I think that, it's a lot of factors that are really working in the premier's favor. He's eating up all the oxygen in the room. He's holding press conferences like several times a week. And he's very good at giving us a soundbite at every press conference and grabbing those headlines. So I think it's a combination of him really, leaning into the political moment, and also, a somewhat weakened opposition.
Do you have to go to all those press conferences?
Thankfully not. But I try when I can, and I'm always tuned in though, obviously. And I will say, just, if your listeners are curious about how the sausage gets made, a lot of us in the press gallery, sometimes because it's one question, one follow-up, the premier's office likes to, sometimes cut off the questions before we would like. That we do sort of not necessarily coordinate, and not all the time, but I think there are general things that everyone wants to hear from him about. And so, if I'm not asking it, I have faith that one of my colleagues will ask him.
Does pouring out the Crown Royal really work?
I mean, we were all talking about it, right? I mean, that one, I think that one actually did not maybe go as Ford had planned. I mean, yeah, it was very theatrical. It was kind of funny almost, because it was like a slow stopper, and so like he had to like shake the bottle at one point. It kind of took longer, I think, than he thought to dump the whole thing out. And really though, if you sort of dig a little bit deeper, the point he's trying to make is that the whiskey maker was moving jobs south of the border to the US. But the company is still doing a lot in Canada. I mean, in Manitoba, in Quebec, even in Windsor. And so I think that he was right to call them out. That worked for him politically, but that ticked off a lot of people in the industry, and even some people in Ford's own base, even conservatives too, who said, this isn't exactly the right criticism, but obviously. This has been working for the premier, and so I think we're going to see a lot more of that from him. He was like calling out like the owner of a Hamilton steel plant. He has been criticizing Trump, but I will say that the government, the provincial government, is actually now getting rolling on different ads that are going to be airing in the U.S. that strike a bit more of a positive tone rather than just criticism. So it seems like he might be changing tack a little bit, and I speculate and wonder if the orders are coming from the PMO and Mark Carney, if he's just asking Ford to maybe tone it down a little bit, because it seems like we're in the long haul with this whole tariff back and forth.
He seems to have a great relationship with Mark Carney, a liberal and a conservative. Often the Ontario Premier has been Captain Canada and been supportive of the federal party, even if it is of a liberal or different political stripe. That certainly wasn't the case with Justin Trudeau, though. Do you think this is real? Do they have a close working relationship, or is it just manufactured for political purposes?
I mean, I that's a very good question. I mean, it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, with Trudeau, Ford, it was sort of an on again, off again bromance, right? Like the province needs and gets a lot of money from the feds. And so I guess when it was politically advantageous for him, Ford would go and say he's standing shoulder to shoulder with Trudeau. But a lot of us before Trudeau stepped down had been hearing that Ford essentially wanted to run against Trudeau during the snap provincial election. And so that, maybe threw a wrench in things. He ended up sort of running on the whole Trump question, which obviously worked out in his favor. But he's been singing Mark Carney's praises from day one. And, he hosted him in Etobicoke, the heart of Ford Nation. They had breakfast. I do hear that they talk a lot.
Did he really?
Quite
Did he
a
really
bit. Yeah,
sleep over? Did he really sleep over at the Premier's cottage?
that's
Supposedly.
right. Yep, yep. A sleepover at the cottage. I believe that Carney was one of the, politicians that visited in Muskoka along with the premiers for the Council of the Federation that got Ford Nation gear, Protect Ontario hoodies, all the merchandise. And yeah, Ford said that they were up until the wee hours, sitting by the fire, solving the world's problems. And I do think that they are kind of on the same page. Like they're both business minded. People, right? And so I think that even when Ford isn't necessarily happy with the feds, he won't necessarily call out Carney in the way he did with Trudeau. He'll sort of put it on his ministers or say Ottawa or say the feds. Whereas with Trudeau, I think he was sort of, tapping into a lot of that unpopularity that the federal Liberals were dealing with at the time.
He seems to have been very critical historically of Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta. Has that toned down of late? But what's the relationship, if any, there now?
Yeah, I mean, well, Ford, he just wrapped up his turn. All the premiers take turns being chair of the Council of the Federation, so you get to be like the leader of the all premiers group for a year and host the meetings and all that. And Ford had been, you're right, pretty critical of Danielle Smith, especially. I think a lot of Canadian politicians were, especially because of her approach to Trump and tariffs. And granted, Danielle Smith's doing what works for her in Alberta, what speaks to her base and the province there, because obviously they have very high stakes with Trump and their oil and everything, but that also sort of shifted. Ford seems to be in his, as one meme account put it, in his lover boy era, because soon after he was signing a memorandum of understanding with Alberta, as he's done with several other provinces, to sort of knock down interprovincial trade barriers as one way to deal with tariffs and sort of protect Ontario from that. And in a very very photo op-y Ford moment, they signed the MOU together, big photo op, and then Ford took off his belt buckle that he was wearing. This was like around the time of Calgary Stampede, and it said Ford Nation, and he like even did a thing where he like lassoed his belt around. So yeah, it was a moment, but when it came to the MOUs, I think that Ford now sees it's all about having a united front, politically speaking, in Canada when we're dealing with the chaos south of the border.
It's amazing that he is, as you say, in the honeymoon, and his popularity has gone up above 50%. It's incredible. And you wonder how anyone could compete against that. And so I think that the next thing we got to turn to, obviously, is the upcoming convention this weekend for the Ontario Liberal Party and the leadership review vote that's going to take place. I'm not going to take a position on that vote at all. For anyone that knows my last name, they may understand why I'm not going to take a position on that. But we're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Sabrina Nanji. And chat a little bit about what she hears, what she thinks, what she expects to happen this weekend at the Ontario Liberal Party convention. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with Sabrina Nanji of the Queen's Park Observer. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Sabrina Nanji of the Queen Park Observer. It's an online newsletter, and she calls herself incredibly good at analysis, but also a little bit of gossip. And that sounds like a fun combination of analysis, and makes for great reading. And I've had the privilege of reading a couple of your articles, and so it's a real pleasure to meet you and have you on today. So thank you so much for joining us. So we talked a little bit about Ford. This weekend, the Ontario Liberal Party is having its convention. The rules are that for the first convention after an election defeat, you got to have a leadership review. Tell me what you think the issues are and what's going to happen. It appears that Nathan Erskine Smith was maybe a little bit of a campaign, but then has gone quiet. So what do you hear? What's the gossip? What's the analysis?
I mean, it's a big weekend for Bonnie Crombie because, yeah, as you mentioned, she's facing a leadership review. This is something that, it's just a normal thing. It's just party process to take place after an election. And so essentially, card carrying Liberals will all be, descend on Toronto this weekend and decide if Bonnie Crombie should stay at the party helm. Now, what I'm hearing is that the Liberals are essentially split. Like delegates who are attending there's nearly 2,000 of them who are going and who will be able to vote on Bonnie Crombie's future. I'm hearing they're essentially split. That there's a lot to celebrate with the February election and a lot to work on. Interestingly, the party just released campaign debrief post-mortem report that was pretty long. I think a lot of people had a lot of takes on that. Some people said it didn't go far enough. Interviews with a lot of organizers on, what went wrong and what went right in the campaign. And like I said, the Liberals have a lot to be happy about. They finally got recognized status, which is 12 seats. And actually, popular vote wise, they beat the NDP, which remained official opposition. But because the NDP has a much more efficient vote, the Liberals are still in third place. I think the biggest sin of her seat in Mississauga, where obviously she was, a former mayor, very popular at the time, but the Liberals and put a lot of effort and ground game into, essentially blocking her, and they did that successfully. I mean, they had ads attacking her, saying that she's, a tax and spend liberal. His mother-in-law, Sylvia Gualtieri, in the riding that Bonnie Crombie was running in, and even the premier himself was door knocking there. They had a lot of heavyweight cabinet ministers, so they were trying really hard to keep that seat from her, and they were successful in it. And so I think that that's one thing that a lot of Liberals aren't happy about, that they think, someone else should be leader right now. But I talked to some other, grits, and they say that Bonnie Crombie, is a stellar fundraiser. She helped the party clear its debts, that they had from back in the 2022 campaign, that, coming back out of the penalty box, which Ontario has had the Liberals in for the last 3 elections, is not going to happen overnight. And so the stakes are really high for Bonnie Crombie this weekend. And then obviously, technically she needs 50% to survive this leadership review, 50% support. But the unofficial cutoff in Canadian politics is about 66%, because if you get, 51%, what does that say about that the 49% who's not happy about you being leader? So I think that no matter what, Bonnie Crombie is going to have her work cut out for her. If she's and start attacking Doug Ford and getting ready for the next election.
So tell me a little bit more about why you think she lost the riding. It was a riding that did not have an incumbent conservative. So of all the other ridings in Mississauga, it should have been winnable. And the opponent was someone, yeah, it was Patrick Brown's mother-in-law, and someone who had been involved in politics before, but someone who really didn't have a lot of name recognition at all, and really, wasn't known. And so, what does that say?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of factors at play here. Like I said, the PCs, they really hearing them like every few minutes on the radio, like come like right, as we were getting down to the wire during the campaign. They did have Patrick Brown's mother-in-law, you're right, Sylvia Gualtieri. She is known for in Ontario politics is his organizing and his ability to get people out to vote for you. And if you believe the campaign postmortem that the Liberal Party put out itself, they said that, part of why the party wasn't able to get any seats in Mississauga or even, a big chunk of the 905, which is a very vote rich, seat rich area. It can make or break governments at Queen's Park and even federally. That they said that Bonnie Crombie sort of waffled and took way too long to pick the riding that she wanted to run in. And she did, she kind of did keep it a bit of a mystery. I think part of that was strategic because if you don't tell your opponents where you're running, they don't know necessarily where to pour their resources. But it sort of hurt other candidates, was the analysis from the postmortem. So I think there's a lot at play there. But I think it was very surprising that Bonnie Crombie wasn't able to pick up any seats for the Liberals in Mississauga, and also there were 5 ridings, if I remember correctly, that they lost by 200 votes, and so I think that there was a lot of efforts and sending volunteers, to some of those closer ridings rather than a slam dunk riding like Toronto St. Paul's, which the Liberals ended up winning back. Uh, uh, from the Envy does say that as long as it makes sense, the next by-election that will come up, she'll run. I think politically she kind of has to do that, just to show that she can win something and win a seat. But she did say she's not going to, so that she can the same way Pierre Poilievre did.
What does it say when a mayor of a neighboring city works so hard to defeat you? He's a conservative, clearly, but he was the leader and got beat and unseated effectively by Doug Ford, not directly, but effectively. And it appears that he worked so hard to defeat his neighboring mayor. What does that say?
Yeah, I mean, politics makes for strange bedfellows, right? And I think that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, was kind of at work here too. Like obviously, yeah, previously no love lost between Patrick Brown and Doug Ford. In terms of personnel, even obviously Doug Ford took over the reins from Patrick Brown. But there's also no love lost between Bonnie Crombie and Patrick Brown either. When Peel was being dissolved, the Ford government has sort of watered that down. That we saw visibly like press conferences at Queen's Park with a lot of tension between Patrick Brown and Bonnie Crombie. They were both like rolling their eyes when the other one would speak. And so I think that probably came into play a little bit. Like it did almost seem a bit personal. But I think that's just how it goes in politics. And yeah, Patrick Brown, his organizing efforts, his support, I guess for him, it worked, and it worked for Doug Ford. So again, yeah, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for Bonnie Crombie.
What are the rumors or the analysis of potential leadership aspirants? Nathan Erskine Smith came out and made a couple of comments, but then seems to have gone quiet. So, what are you hearing about other potential interested parties? What are they doing? if anything?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. Nate Erskine-Smith is interesting. Obviously, backbench federal MP for the Liberals. He's kind of known as, this rebel, not someone that, drinks the Kool-Aid, if I can put it that way. He was runner-up to Bonnie Crombie in the last Liberal leadership race, and he has not been shy about calling her out and the results of the election and pinning it on her. And you're right that he has gone a bit quieter now. And I think it's because one, maybe he wants to run if there is going to be a leadership contest, because I know that while a lot of liberals agreed with what he was saying, they really weren't happy with how he was saying it. They are all about, party unity and not airing dirty laundry out in public. I think, Erskine Smith didn't necessarily do himself any favors when he very publicly called out Mark Carney for not putting him back in cabinet. And it sort of just, at least with liberals I've been speaking with, felt like sour grapes. And they really didn't like his approach. But I think if there is a leadership contest, we can definitely expect him to throw his hat in the ring. But he's not the only one. There are a lot of other folks, including some heavyweights like Navdeep Bains. This is, just take this all with a grain of salt because it's all rumor. Navdeep Bains, former federal MP. I've heard a lot of his organizers are chatting up delegates saying that he would run. So vote Bonnie down. I also actually spoke with Jeff Lehman, former candidate, former mayor of Barrie, who's now doing work in the region there. And he said that, he's supporting Bonnie Crombie. He's backing her 100%. But if there was a leadership contest, that he would consider throwing his hat in the ring. And I know that excited a lot of liberals that I spoke with because, like Bonnie Crombie, he's a bit of a centrist. Nate Erskine-Smith, you can call him a bit of a lefty in terms of, liberal politics anyway. And so I think a lot of people were excited about Jeff Lehman. And then finally, Karina Gould as well, who we know ran federally for leader there. And I know her team, her supporters would really like to see her run. So I don't think anyone is willing to say, yes, I'm in, just because, Bonnie Crombie's body is still warm. She's not going anywhere just yet. Everyone's being very diplomatic, except for Erskine Smith, who's maybe now, changed his strategy a little bit. But yeah, if she goes, I think there are a lot of people who are just waiting to again, have another leadership contest and see if they can be the ones to finally get the Liberals out of the sidelines in Ontario.
So I hear two sort of issues on that. One is that now's not the time to have a leadership convention and it'll be divisive, et cetera. And then other people say no, it's a great process to get people involved and get excited and bring new renewal to the party. What's your sense? Is a leadership convention? It's what 3.5 years to the next election, unless he calls an early election, and he's done that a couple times before. So there's nothing to say that he couldn't do that. But what's your sense? Is attention to a leadership convention helpful to rebuilding a party or harmful to rebuilding a party?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you're right. I think liberals, fall on both sides of that. I mean, as a journalist, I love the idea of leadership contest. It just makes for a lot of interesting stories, a lot of interesting chatter. From a party's perspective, there are benefits, right? Like you can talk a lot about policy, about the direction of the party. It's a bit of a soul-searching moment for the liberals. You get a lot more debate. You'd also get a lot more money too, because you might and engagement, right? You might have new members sign up. People donating to the leadership contest. Leaders also have to pay the party too, so it would be a bit of a cash grab. But at the same time, this will be 3 leaders in 3 elections. And one thing that stood out to me in the campaign postmortem report from the Liberals is that they didn't really give Ontarians a reason, why should I vote for Bonnie? And I think that for a lot of new-ish, rookie leaders, they need time to sort of get them, define yourself and get Ontarians to really get to know you. The PCs were very effective at defining Bonnie Crombie and some of her baggage, that made her maybe not look so great. And so I think that there are benefits to keeping her. I know liberals love her fundraising prowess, that she is very good at bringing in money for the party. So there's pros and cons to keeping her. A lot of people say that, change doesn't happen overnight. She's made these gains. They're in it for the long game. It's a long haul. And don't forget, they're not just going against the PCs and Doug Ford. It's also Marit Stiles and the NDP and differentiating themselves from that. So, pros and cons to having a leadership contest. But me personally, as someone who reports on this stuff, I think it's way more interesting to have a leadership contest.
So if it's more interesting and you're going to pay more attention to it, isn't that helpful? It means that there'll be more attention paid to the Liberal Party and their policies and if not the leader, their candidates for leader.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, Bonnie Crombie has gone in there. She's made her changes, and so you would kind of have to go through all of that all over again. And I will say that the Liberals, I think, and in particular Bonnie Crombie, are a bit of media darlings, right? Like Bonnie Crombie doesn't have a seat in the House, but she's there when the House is sitting in question, like after question period. There are media scrums, and sometimes she gets her quotes ahead of Marit Stiles and the NDP. So I think that, there will still be press coverage, but it's interesting because when the NDP had a leadership contest just before, or around the same time essentially as the Liberals, no one was really talking about it because Marit Stiles was running unopposed. And so I think you need to have not just the contest, but like an interesting contest with a lot of people who want to throw their hat in the ring, who are, talking about, bold policies. And even generally, we talk a lot about Bonnie Crombie and her leadership review, but the weekend after, Marit Stiles is also facing a leadership review, but there's not so much buzz about that. So I think that that just speaks to the Liberal brand still being very strong in Ontario. I mean, obviously the Conservatives were attacking Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals a lot more than they were Marit Stiles and the NDP. And so I think that they really do potentially have like can be competitive. It's just a matter of getting there.
But one of the criticisms that some people have suggested, and the reason why Karina Gould is being talked about, that Erskine Smith is being talked about, is that she was too centrist. She was like Doug Ford or conservative light. Other people say, well, no, that's where you need to be from a Liberal Party. You need to go to the center, and that's what Mark Carney did. So what's your sense of the people that are coming to the convention and the Liberal Party in general? Do they want someone that's going to be more left, reform, progressive like Karina Gould or Nathan Smith, or do they want someone that's more centrist like Bonnie Crombie?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I know that there's like this, faction within the Liberal Party. They're calling themselves the New Leaf Liberals. They are a bit more left-leaning than someone like Bonnie Crombie or even Jeff Lehman, who are more centrist. And I think Ontario itself, though, is a bit centrist. Even in past elections, we've seen the NDP sort of go towards the center, and that really ticks off a lot of the members of the NDP party. But I think trying to out NDP, the NDP, or out left the NDP hasn't necessarily always worked for the Liberals. But, you look at someone like Kathleen Wynne, who managed to win a majority when everyone thought that, post Delta McGuinty, it just wasn't going to happen. And Kathleen Wynne called herself like a social justice warrior. And so I do wonder now, though, if the tone has shifted in the province. Obviously, with Trump and tariffs, I think even Doug Ford has gone a bit more towards the center. It's like emphasis on the progressive side of progressive conservative. And that has not made, that has ticked off a lot of social conservatives and some people in his party, which sort of broke off and then fizzled out, in Ontario. We had the New Blue Party, that their spinoff, which doesn't really have much of a presence at all. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be in the center for the Liberals, but I do think they need to have some bold policies that would appeal to women, young people, and that the NDP isn't really doing. I get a lot of good policy. We get a lot of good policy ideas from the Greens, which might be a farther left. But yeah, I think that everyone is kind of bunching in the center in Ontario right now. So whoever the new leader or whoever the leader of the Liberals will be, if it's Bonnie Crombie or someone new, I think that's going to be a fine line they have to walk.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with Sabrina Nanji of the Queen's Park Observer, an online newsletter that you can go to their website and or Twitter or a whole bunch of other places and get access to. We're going to take a break and come back. And I'm going to ask Sabrina about some of the policies, because it seems like there's a whole bunch of policies that you should be able to attack Doug Ford on, and none of them seem to be to sticking. And is he the Teflon man? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Sabrina Nanji on from the Queen's Park Observer. She is a journalist and a founder and editor of this newsletter that is online. Sabrina, how do people get it if they're interested in reading what you've got to say?
You just go to qpobserver.ca and everything's right there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for writing and for analyzing and repeating some of the gossip and for coming on the show today. So I got to ask you though, you think about the tunnel underneath the 401. You think about Highway 413. You think about Ontario Place and the spa. You think about closing down the Science Center. You think about healthcare and emergency room lineups and wait times and lack of hospitals and I could go on and on and on. Nothing seems to stick to this guy. What is it?
Yeah, you're right. I think he is a bit of premier. There's a lot, like there's no shortage of things to attack Doug Ford on, right? Like even just think about the green belt, which there's been a lot of dirt that's come out about that, a lot of dirt about Ontario Place. The list goes on. Nothing really seems to stick to him, and I think there is a lot happening there. I think Trump and the tariffs has been the best political gift to Doug Ford and the people around him. I think that not having an opposition that's very effective. I mean, it is hard to be effective when you have a majority PC government like the Ford government has, but maybe not as exciting or as engaging for Ontarians. I think that's a big thing. I also think that unless the RCMP, which is still investigating the whole Greenbelt scandal, unless they actually lay charges, I don't know if Doug Ford is that's going to end up landing, in his backyard, because obviously we knew about the RCMP investigation. He called a snap election and he still won a third mandate. I think that there's a lot at play there. I mean, obviously, if you just look at cost of living, Doug Ford is always talking about, cutting taxes, the gas tax, no tolls. He's very motorist, driver friendly. That matters a lot to voters in the 905 in particular, who are dealing with commutes for the most part. The tunnel under the 401, that's a bit of a ambitious pie in the sky proposal is what we hear from a lot of experts. And I think that Ontario Place, that the people who are mad about that probably would never vote for Doug Ford anyway. So I think there's a lot that's working for him right now. Also, if you just look at turnout, in the February election, like it was cold. Who wants to go out campaigning? Who wants to go out to vote? I mean, turnout has been pretty low in Ontario. And when that happens, that tends to favor conservatives. It tends to favor incumbents. I think that, personally, Doug Ford has this shtick where he's like for the people, he stands up for the little guy, and whether or not that's actually true, in his policies, that actually works for him, and people believe it. And maybe more so than Marit Stiles or Bonnie Crombie or even Mike Schreiner. And so really, I think that's sort of the Ford factor here. He's a very good retail politician, especially in times like this where we're fighting with the US and Donald Trump, where people are dealing with, skyrocketing cost of living, that maybe if they hear something they don't like about the Greenbelt, but they're worried about their kids being able to afford a house, it's more so like the ends justify the means. And so I think that whenever Doug Ford's talking, housing starts are nowhere where they need to be to get to his house, to hit his housing targets. But I think that they believe him even, and they see him as the one who's going to actually get it done, as the conservatives liked to say, more so than the other parties. And even if you look at the 2022 election around the pandemic, like I think that people were very forgiving for what happened to the Ford government, and then tariffs came right on the heels of that. So politically, I think he presented himself during the campaign as the steady hand, someone who's not going to rock the boat in all of this uncertainty. And so really that's actually really working for him.
You said that you had some gossip. What intrigued? It's kind of intriguing. So, can you share some gossip with us? What's the gossip you hear at Queen's Park?
I mean, where do I begin? A lot of liberals are feeling chatty, I think, just because we're on the eve of the AGM, and from what I've heard is that, informal polls of the delegates who are attending, it's roughly about 50-50 with Bonnie Crombie, and that people are the knives are sort of coming out already. People are waiting in the wings to just essentially knife her. I mean, we don't know how it's going to go. I actually would be surprised if Bonnie Crombie didn't hit the number she needs to stay on as leader. But that's one piece of gossip that I'm hearing, that the liberals, maybe they wouldn't want to say it out loud, but I think about half of them are not happy with Bonnie Crombie and want to knife her.
Okay. Any other gossip?
You're putting me on the spot. I have to think of something. There is a rumor, and just keep this in mind that it's like a rumor, not substantiated at all. But there was chatter that if Nate Erskine-Smith doesn't have a provincial leadership position to run for, that potentially he might go local and come for Brad Bradford at Toronto City Council, come for his seat, because they're both in the Beaches East York riding over there. So rumors abound,
Well,
as usual.
that election's coming up a lot sooner than a Ontario provincial election, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah. He could do both, arguably.
Are you hearing anything about John Tory?
I mean, I think, yeah, I think I've been hearing what some folks have been hearing, that senior, I think you mean, right, wants to potentially come back and run for mayor. And I think that, from what I hear, he's probably the only one that could give Olivia Chow a run for her money when the time comes. I mean, Toronto really loves John Tory. Personal drama aside, he's still around, and I hear him on News Talk all the time. And I think that he hasn't said no, and that's usually a tell in politics, is when someone doesn't rule something out, it means they're open to running for mayor again.
You mentioned that Merritt Stiles of the NDP is up for a similar leadership review, but there's sort of no controversy about that. Why the difference between the NDP and the Liberal Party?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, the provincial liberals kind of remind me of the federal conservatives, that, if you don't perform or meet expectations, then they're just going to knife each other. And I think that with Marit Stiles, a lot of them are breathing a sigh of relief because, like I said earlier, they lost a big chunk of the popular vote. Whereas the liberals, technically got more votes, but just because they have what we call an efficient vote, it's the ridings where the NDP performs well that gets you the seats that you need to stay on as official opposition. And so I think the NDP is really happy about that. They managed to hang on to that. They lost some seats, but they're still standing. And I think the challenge for Marit Stiles, though, is that she hasn't really, defined herself in the post Andrea Horwath years. She was education critic. A lot of us, knew Marit Stiles from that way. She's a former trustee. And so I have heard that, she is going to be going a lot harder on the Ford government when it comes to education. They're talking now about school board governments making big changes, even potentially getting rid of school board trustees. And so I think that now we're going to start hearing a lot more from Marit Stiles on the education front, which is obviously very important to Ontarians. And so I think she's maybe trying to fly under the radar, keep a low profile, let Bonnie Crombie deal with the drama, and then just maybe cruise with her leadership review. So I think that it could have been a lot worse for Marit Stiles. And, the party performed well, maybe not as well as they had wanted. But like I said, I think still hanging on to official opposition status is a huge win for her to be able to hang on to the leadership.
Sabrina Nanji, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. This has been a fascinating conversation. So what's your bet? What's going to happen? Do you have a bet for us?
Oh, I could not have a bet on that. But I will say I will be surprised if Bonnie Crombie doesn't manage to hang on. I know there's a lot of chatter. A lot of people are, airing the dirty laundry, which is a healthy exercise for any political party and partisans. But I would be very surprised if she doesn't stick around after this weekend.
So hanging on is not getting the 55%.
50
It's getting
plus
more
one,
than
yeah.
six. It's getting more than 66, you think?
Right. Yeah. I think that it would be very hard for her to say she wants to stay on if she got, just the bare minimum, which is 50% plus one. But, if she did stay on after that, getting under 60%, I think she would really have her work cut out for her, uniting the party before she can even, look to the rest of the province and say, vote for me.
Sabrina Nanji, thanks so much. Remind us all how we can follow you if we're interested in reading your newsletter.
Yeah. Just go to qpobserver.ca and you'll see everything there.
Thanks so much. We're going to take a final break, and I'm going to come back with my own comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Back in two. Thanks, Sabrina. Really appreciate it.